Water jewels falling into a dream, realm of magic. Sun bumps her forehead on peak of Mount Fuji. It would be hard to talk about Japanese literature without first mentioning the origins of language, which came from heavy Chinese influence. There were two main types of writing: Nihon Shoki, written predominantly in Chinese, and Kojiki, which included a lot of purely Japanese elements, making it essentially the first foundation of Japanese literary work. This distinction between Chinese and Japanese and different spheres of life continued for a long period of time. Chinese, for example, was used for laws, but gradually the language was adapted into an alphabet, and more people began to write in Japanese, especially in the Kojiki, where stories that were Japanese in nature were born, the most famous of which being The Tale of the Princess Kaguya, adapted by Studio Ghibli. It was then that the form of the tanka was born, during this period around the 8th century, where language was being adapted from Chinese into something that was Japanese, and haiku was born from tanka. A tanka is composed of 5 lines, and essentially it's 2 parts. 3 lines and 2 lines, which talk as if in dialogue with each other. 5-7-5 and then 7-7. And this 5-7-5, these first 3 lines, were known as hoku, which literally translates as the first lines. It was these 3 lines that later split apart and became into its own genre, the haiku. And actually, until Basho, haiku wasn't really regarded so much as a genre, as simply a way of entertainment, as a creative exercise. Of course, I had to have Basho then as the very first introduction to this video, and I wanted to talk about what then makes this genre, as it is now a genre, so unique. What makes a single 3 lines so special? Genius is firstly in the brevity. 17 syllables is really not a lot, and actually in the Japanese it's not written as 3 lines, but rather as a single vertical 1 line. It's only in English that we have adopted the 3-line approach, which I will use throughout the video as I can't read the original Japanese. And really, rhyming in Japanese doesn't quite work the same way either. Most of the rhyme that we consider to be a part of this genre of poetry comes actually from the strict adherence to syllables and structure. Perfect translations of haikus into English is impossible because we simply don't have a lot of the necessary grammatical structures and expressions that would render it possible. It's not like other European poetry. You can translate a French poem, you'll lose a lot of the nuance, but you can translate it and even carry through a lot of the rhyme and a lot of the meter. But Japanese principles don't work like that. Take, for example, this kireji, which you can loosely translate as a cutting line. Essentially, this comes after the first 2 lines, or what we consider to be the first 2 lines, and it serves as a pause and as a word that really adds an added layer of nuance and an added edge to the poem. It gives it that tonality. It really drives the poem home, or drives the impression home, rather. So it's simply a principle that we cannot convey. I've always been a fan of Japanese literature, but it was after my summer trip to the land of the rising sun where I truly realized just how much there is to admire in this country's deep cultural legacy, and just how much complexity there is in a single 3 lines. Some conventions of the genre are that the first line should give an opening introduction and an opening impression, give the reader some understanding of what the poem will be about. The second one should develop this impression further, should explain why we should care, and the third one is what drives the point home, what adds a sense of finality and a sense of completion to the poem. Haikus tend to have a word called kigo, which essentially means that it's a marker of the seasons. Haikus are invariably set in autumn, spring, summer, or winter, and these kigo are incredibly important words that mark what season it is, because that changes the mood. And the seasonal words themselves are not as important as the connotations they bring, but nonetheless they are quite present, and that's another added layer of nuance that makes these poems difficult to translate, because essentially we don't have such markers in English. And even for translators who know Japanese and who know English or another language, these words are often difficult to locate. I know that there exists special sites even for Japanese people to identify these keigo and that have this comprehensive database of these seasonal markers. But a haiku is least of all a description, even though so far we've been talking about descriptions. The aim, as was often said by masters of the genre, is to give things a name, to put into words the feeling that you have or a description of an object as if you're seeing for the first time. You have to convey that sense of wonder that comes from a first impression, like the way that a child may think about the first snow, and in a poetic way, of course. And I said earlier that it is just a single 3 lines, but Masaoka Shiki, a renowned poet of the genre, once said that it is not just, well, a single line. Rather, these are lines that contain the whole world. These are lines that are infinite. And because these poems are cyclical, because they revolve around a season, it is in fact possible to connect several haikus and to make one long, infinite chronology of time to envelop the whole world into haikus. But at the same time, a haiku's setting is invariably the present. It is a short snippet of a current moment, temporary, fleeting. The poems of the genre appreciate the beauty. Without this brevity of life, life would lose its meaning, and that's what haikus aim to reflect. This beauty of living a life that you know is limited, that is not infinite. Oh, snail, climb Mount Fuji, but slowly, slowly. Kobayashi. The haiku by Kobayashi shows the importance and perseverance of a single snail's, a single creature's journey. A haiku is then like a single moment in this continuous journey, like an element of a wider puzzle. That is why it is typically frowned upon in Japanese to write in the single line sentences which kind of carry on, sentences which are not complete, because it feels too fragmented and not reflective of this wider journey of life. Not sure this convention carries through in the English translation, but it is after all a convention. And another key element of haikus, or at least that what haiku masters consider to be an important part of it, is that you should be showing and you shouldn't be telling, and you should let the reader think for themselves. You should have the reader be asking questions like why, and find answers which specify and make your description more precise. For example, why are the leaves on the ground? Because it's autumn. Things like this. Impressions, words, questions should arise in the reader's mind. And a haiku is also really heavily associated with themes of the poet and nature, and this is why the video features so much of the beautiful Japanese landscape around Mount Fuji. But of course it is not just poetry about landscapes. It is poetry about emotions and feelings, and Basho was the epitome of the wandering poet archetype. He traveled across the whole country looking for genuine emotions to describe in his work. My Fuji trip was in the summer, and as a part of his summer haikus, Basho wrote, "The air remains still, all the leaves refuse to budge. Beautiful summer." That day there was almost no wind around Mount Fuji, but the freshness of the lake made it pleasant, and the view allowed me to continue even in the heat. Along the way I came upon many shrines and temples, and thought often that it was a lovely place to honor deceased loved ones. Temple bells die out. The fragrant blossoms remain. A perfect evening. Around Mount Fuji, there were plenty of cafes to stop in, which had lots of flower beds planted around them. These family-run cozy spots were perfect for a weary traveler. Orchid is breathing its pungent incense into a butterfly's wings. Perhaps also the incense gave strength to me, and I walked on for hours without the need to pause, surrounded by the peace and tranquility that comes only from the beauty of nature. Ah, the summer grass, the only thing left behind from warriors' dreams. The grass grew, and no one cut it. No one attempted to contain this wild and beautiful, majestic nature. Mount Fuji, if not including the few well-trodden paths, remained as it had always remained, weathered only by time and other forces of nature. Summer in the world, floating on little waves of shimmering lake. It was a summer just like any other summer, the warm season of the year, but in reality it was also a summer unlike any other summer, a short but impactful moment for my experiences of the world. Fuji towers over the lake, but it also towers over Japan. It is a place that is so incredibly important to Japan's culture and environment and legacy. There are no words that would describe this site in any way that renders it justice. We can only attempt to give names and give words to impressions as haiku poets do. I'd like to end this video with some lines by Ueshiba. There are many paths leading to the top of Mount Fuji, but there is only one summit: love. Love yourself, love nature, love life, and love haikus. With love, Felina's Pages.